Thank you, everyone, for joining this discussion panel on our Space Education and Strategic Applications Conference. Uh, Today, we're going to discuss the Gateway to the Future, sorry, space exploration, education, and the new role of the Space Force. And I will leave you with our moderator and chair, Michelle Watts. Enjoy the session. And remember, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom to put your questions and comments, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who has been able to join us. This morning, our speakers are going to touch on a variety of opportunities and challenges in the realm of space. So these are both current and potential challenges, and our speakers will talk about economic, legal, and political aspects related to space. And importantly, we are going to close with a talk on education, because of course that is a very important way that we are preparing ourselves for these challenges. So our first speaker is Dr. Gary Deal. And Dr. Deal is a jack of many trades. He has published hundreds of articles and podcasts related to space. He is an instructor for APUS. And it might not surprise you to know that he is a member of Mensa and has many degrees. He accumulates, or I should say he works for a new one almost every year or so, with a couple most recently being in space studies and a master's of education. So Gary's going to talk to us about leaving home, opportunities and challenges for human exploration of the solar system and the Milky Way galaxy. So Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Michelle? Wonderful. Thanks again. Appreciate the very warm introduction, and hello, everybody. Many of you, obviously, I know and have seen before at the conferences. I'm just sharing my screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Everything looks good. Okay, perfect. So as Michelle said, I'm Dr. Gary Deal. Nice to be with you today. Jack of many trades, I think, is the best way to describe my background. I am just an autodidact. I like to learn, and this is one area that I'm passionate about and interested in. So today, what I've done is condensed an hour and 15-minute presentation down to 12 minutes. It's going to be a speed run, to say the least, but I'm going to try to present some information on the concept of leaving home, and what we mean specifically by this is space exploration beyond our solar system, right? What does that look like? What will that entail? What are the challenges? What do we need to think about? A lot of this Dr. Watts went over, so I won't repeat it. I have published quite a bit on the subject related to space studies, but also specifically interstellar space travel and intergalactic space travel. A few of my articles are linked here, and I'm happy to share them with anybody that would be interested after the meeting. I'm also, just for what it's worth to mention, the co-editor-in-chief of the Space Education and Strategic Applications Journal, along with Dr. Kristen Miller. So on behalf of the journal, we just want to thank everybody for attending and your support of the CISA conference. Obviously, we're a collaborative effort with them, and we're grateful for you being here and sharing your day with us. So why are we talking about this subject, interstellar space travel? Why does it matter? The basic idea here is that we're going to need to go at some point. And by go, I mean, we're going to need to leave home. We're going to need to leave Earth. When we do, we're going to need a plan. Space is obviously huge and difficult for us to conquer. We'll talk about why, and we should not wait until this becomes a crisis to figure out, obviously, where we go and what we do and how we go about accomplishing that. So why are we going to need to go? There's a number of potential reasons, but the point to note is that this is inevitable one way or another. So number one, obviously, we have become a threat to ourselves through weapons that can no longer be uninvented. If you saw the movie Oppenheimer this summer, it was a beautiful film, but it kind of highlights the fact that our weapons of mass destruction could easily destroy ourselves if we're not careful. If we don't do it, Earth might do it. It's done it before, super volcanoes and the kinds of natural disasters that threaten Earth's existence on the planet. If Earth doesn't do it, the sun certainly will eventually. And by eventually, we're talking about billions of years, probably somewhere in the order of 5 billion. But the sun eventually will enter what's known as the red giant phase. And when it does, Earth will no longer be habitable, right? It will become so hot that all the water will boil away, and humans, at least as they currently exist, will no longer be able to live here. Space itself could destroy us, right? We have near Earth objects, killer asteroids, for lack of a better word, pulsars, solar flares, the kinds of things that could wipe us out even before that eventual 5 billion year sort of timeline of the sun's eventual death and destruction of the Earth. And then obviously I'm being tongue in cheek here, but there's a number of different ways in which we might meet our end. And so it's important to think about what happens next and how we avoid that eventual extinction. When are we going to need to go? Again, as I mentioned, at a minimum or at a maximum time frame, I guess you could say 4 to 5 billion years from now. But anything in between then, a major crisis, a geological event, a space-related event, a weapon of mass destruction setting off a World War III level cataclysm, it's impossible to predict, right? We don't know. So we should start thinking about making our species a multi-planetary and ideally multi-system, multi-solar, multi-stellar species. Difficult to travel in space, right? We know this, and this is just some stark and sobering reminders. We've lost a lot of great people to this effort to pioneer space. The Apollo 1 astronauts were among the first casualties, and they hadn't even left the launch pad, right? They were just in testing in Canaveral when their module caught fire due to a training exercise, and all 3 astronauts perished. Then we lost Challenger in 1986, and all of the astronauts aboard that mission. Then we lost Columbia in 2003. Virgin Galactic lost 2 of its pilots in 2014 when what appears to be a pilot error caused the destruction of the spaceship and eventual crash landing. Interestingly, there have been no deaths recorded in space as of yet, at least not that I'm aware. But everything that we've experienced as far as casualties has occurred, obviously on launch or on re-entry to Earth. But the point is, this is hard stuff, right? How big is space? 95% of all of the astronauts who have ever been to space have never left low Earth orbit, right? So 5% of them went to the moon, and that's it. And even the moon's distance being, approximately 250,000 miles, is not all that far, right, on the scale of space. The solar system is really just the corner that we happen to live on. In the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy is a host to 100 billion stars. Our sun is just one, right? And we're sort of off in some obscure suburban neighborhood of our galaxy. And the galaxy is about 100,000 light years across. So let's put that into perspective. What is a light year? Not this guy for the purposes of our conversation today. Well, light years measure distance, not speed, as many of you space buffs will know. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second, which equates to, in a sort of frame of reference, a measurement that we're all familiar with from our speedometers in our cars. It's 670 million miles per hour, right? So a light year is the amount of distance that light can travel in 1 year. So 1 light year is approximately 5.8 trillion miles, or 5.9 if you want to round up. So that's the measure of distance of a light year. Why does that matter? Well, when we talk about our nearest stellar neighbor, right, if we wanted to go to the closest star from our own sun, that would be Proxima Centauri. And Proxima Centauri is 4.25 light years from us. So what does that mean with today's current technology? Well, if we were to look at the space shuttle, for example, which we're all familiar with, and many people who are not space nerds like me think the space shuttle is meant to go anywhere, like it could visit other planets. Those who know better know it's obviously just a low Earth orbiting spacecraft. But if we use that at the speed that it travels at low Earth orbit to try to go to another star like Proxima Centauri, the speed it travels in low Earth orbit is 17,500 miles an hour. So if you do the math, it would take the space shuttle about 40,000 years to get to Proxima Centauri. Now, to be fair, let's talk about the fastest man-made space object we've ever created, which to date is called the Parker Solar Probe. It is currently making elliptical orbits around the sun right now, and its top recorded speed so far is about 364,000 miles an hour. It's actually expected to hit a little over 400,000 miles an hour on its fastest pass through before it finishes its mission. But even at that speed, if we sent the Parker Solar Probe and we somehow rode on top of it, because there are no seats, there are no astronauts in the solar probe, it would still take us almost 2,000 years to get there. So this is a problem that we need to figure out how to solve if we're going to go anywhere on a reasonable time scale. So what does that mean for us? Well, 100,000 light years crossing the galaxy equates to 588 trillion miles, right? So the Parker Solar Probe, top recorded speed of 364,000 miles, 364,000 miles per hour. It would take the Parker Solar Probe almost 46 million years to cross the galaxy. And the space shuttle, it would take about 1 billion years, right? So again, this kind of puts more of that scale in perspective. So there's really 3 main concepts that are not at least entailing or invoking theoretical physics, which would be the 4th here, to do that. Spaceships that are way, way faster, humans that live a lot longer, or multi-generational space missions. And so number 1, faster spaceships. Obviously, if we could take spaceships and amp them up, right, turbocharge them so that they could achieve significant fractions of light speed, we could potentially cross the distances between stars like our own and Proxima Centauri within the scope of a human lifetime. But there are major challenges with that. And again, we don't have the time here today to cover everything in detail, but the physics of that kind of work, time dilation, which is a concept Einstein discovered, which basically says that as you approach light speed, time slows down. So one sort of consequence of, if you could aboard a spaceship tomorrow that traveled at, say, 90% light speed and make your way to Proxima Centauri in 5 years and then take 5 years coming back, you'd make it back within the span of a decade for you, and you'd be just 10 years older by the time you return. Unfortunately, everyone that you left behind on Earth would have been dead for about 100 years because of the time dilation effect. So obviously that varies with the equation for time dilation, but that's a real problem. And of course, space, there's a lot of threats out there that we need to be concerned with. Looking at number 2, the idea of living longer. So this is biomedical technological advances that would allow for humans to not be limited to our current, what is a 70 to 90 year lifespan that our typical ages make it to in the first world sort of spectrum. So this would involve major breakthroughs in medicine and gerontology and aging. There's major psychological implications about, if you're getting on board a spaceship that's traveling at current spaceship speeds, and you're going to have to be on board for 2,000 or 10,000 years, how are you going to keep from getting bored or from killing the person next to you because they chew their food too loudly? These are things we really need to work out that we haven't really thought of because we've never had to put someone into space for that long. And again, space wants to kill us. So if we're on board for that long, we still need to think about the things out there that are threats. And last but not least, number 3, multi-generational spaceships. So again, this is the idea that if we're willing to do it, we could put today's generation of humans on board a spaceship and send them off with the knowledge that they will never make it to their destination. They're going to die, but they'll have children on board that spaceship. Those children are going to die, but they'll have children, and then the grandchildren will die. And maybe 100 generations of passengers on board that spaceship will make it to the final destination of wherever they're going. It's kind of a morbid trip to begin, for at least for the generations that are not going to make it to the final destination. But again, more of the same things that we need to think about in terms of challenges and obstacles. Concluding my presentation here, because I'm just about to wrap up and I know we're getting close to time. These are some of the things we have to think about in terms of the space challenges. First of all, space is really cold. We know this if you've ever seen a movie, but interestingly, space is also really hot, and this is not something that people intuitively think about. One of the things that spacecraft that are orbiting the planet have to think about, and that is really a concern, is overheating, right? And how do they vent excess heat from the sun out into space so that they don't overheat? This almost killed some of the astronauts on board our Skylab and other Spacelab missions that we've had previously. Space has no air. We know that. Space has no gravity. So the microgravity effects atrophy on muscles, and homeostatic systems is a big problem. Space is not empty, right? There's debris out there. Some of it's moving at near light speeds and it's trying to kill us. It rips through us like, again, like bullets, and radiation in the same way. There's no food or water in space, right? So we need to bring all of our resources with us. There's no circadian rhythm. So our biological design for light and night and sun and day, we need to think about, obviously, the effects of that long term if we're going to leave the planet for extended periods. Loneliness and isolation, again, the psychological implications. There's no Netflix accounts in space, unfortunately. The signals just don't reach that far. And then obviously, again, more tongue in cheek, but who knows what we might encounter off in the distant reaches of the solar system and beyond that we don't even know to expect, because these are questions we don't yet know to ask. So this is my final slide, and I'll close with a quote from one of my heroes, Dr. Carl Sagan, just a consideration in summary of my presentation today. Sagan said in one of his seminal books right before he died in the 90s, "Just now, there are a great many matters that are pressing in on us that compete for the money it takes to send people to other worlds. Should we solve those problems first, or are they a reason for going? Our planet and our solar system are surrounded by a new world ocean, the depths of space, but it is no more impassable than the last." So I totally believe and encourage that spirit from all space enthusiasts, that I do believe we should be thinking about this and how and when and why we might go, but that it's something important and something that should call to our attention today more than it currently does, at least from the general population. So I know I don't need to preach to the choir in this kind of setting, but it's obviously a cause worth considering. So thank you for your time today. Happy to take questions, or if we want to save them until the end, happy to do that as well. But I appreciate everyone listening. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Great. Yeah, I think unless we have a pressing question, we will move on, but I will monitor the Q&A and see if there's something that someone needs, wants answered related to what you just said. Okay, so next we have Dr. Mark Kelso. And Mark is an adjunct faculty member at APUS. He's had a distinguished career in the Army, retired after a quarter century as a Chief Warrant Officer 4 and Master Aviator. So Mark is going to be talking to us today about the legal aspects of the utilization of military personnel for space purposes. Mark, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. I want to share my screen here. Okay, so what we're talking about today in this presentation is what would happen if maybe theoretically one day we'd want to actually use military personnel for security in outer space. And one thing we would have to basically talk about would be what we have in right now, which would be the Outer Space Treaty and other UN United Nations treaties. So I'm a legal studies instructor here at American Public. And I got a couple of quotes I found I wanted to bring out. So, right, this first one's from the Air Force Secretary under the Obama administration. And that basically talks about possibility of conflict on Earth, which actually could go into outer space. And I think we kind of see a lot of that right now. But it's really not, and here's Donald Trump, President Trump, back right before they started the Space Force. And he was basically looking at American presence in space, but we want American domination. And right after that, that's when the Space Force was actually brought online. So looking at it from a theoretical perspective, as Dr. Dield said, space travel, we're going to have these moon bases, trips to Mars, and these are all possible things that are going to happen. And right now, everything's going really good, so we don't have any problems. But what if it did? So if we wanted to bring U.S. military personnel for security purposes, how do we do that? And if we did, what treaties and laws would govern such deployments? And this is kind of important to note. So going through a brief history here of military personnel in space. We've always had it, even back 1958 with the Mercury project, the Apollo project. NASA took United States military pilots and trained them to be astronauts. Even to this day, there's a lot more civilians, not military people and astronauts, but they're still military astronauts, military pilots. And just look about 1982 to 1992, a lot of those classified space shuttle flights were all crewed by astronauts with military backgrounds. So do we need military security in outer space? We don't really have any right now. There's no, we have military police, shore patrol. We don't have any military police in outer space right now. But what we do have is security agreements with Outer Space Treaty and everything else through the United Nations. So what I'm kind of briefly going to talk about is why do we need it? And if we did actually need it, who could do it? Who could do it and who would get to do it? So I call it two basic legal questions. The first one, can we use military personnel for security? And would it violate Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty? And my second question is, if we did that, under what circumstances could the use of force by military personnel in outer space be allowed? Can it be allowed at all under Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty or other relevant UN treaties. So what does the Outer Space Treaty do? Okay, 1967, it provided the framework for international space law for peaceful use and benefit to all countries. And it makes it colored by the country could be as a state. And it's relevant to this day. It has not changed. So that's what it does. There's various articles, but there's mainly 3 articles I want to talk about today. And obviously Article 4 is actually the main one. But what does it not do? It does not ban all military activities, and it does not ban conventional weapons. So first thing, probably one of the most important articles of the Outer Space Treaty is Article 3. And what that's doing here is everything we're going to do in outer space is going to be in accordance with international law. Of course, that would be everybody that's a signatory to the treaties, but that's exactly what it's about. It's international law. Everything in space is international law by treaty. Article 4 is the main one here, and that basically talks about establishment of military bases, which would be banned or forbidden. But you can use military personnel for scientific research or for any other peaceful purposes that shall not be prohibited. It doesn't really say what is any other peaceful purpose. So it's always up to interpretation. So again, any other peaceful purpose shall not be prohibited. So again, there's some very common definitions, and basically they're looking at non-aggressive or non-military. And last article, which is kind of relevant, would actually be Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, and that's where the state parties would have international responsibility for their actions. And this international responsibility would be governmental or non-governmental assets. Now, in addition to the Outer Space Treaty, there's a few other United Nations things here, which would be the International Humanitarian Law, which basically, I'm just going to briefly just mention these. I'm not going to go into them. This could be a presentation. Each one of this could be a presentation in themselves. But that's basically how we limit the effects of armed conflict. And basically, the Rule 3 would actually delineates the members of armed forces are classified as combatants. So Article 3 looks at who's combatants, who's not combatants. And if we look at Article 2 of the forbidden, so basically, yeah, it forbids the use of force against another state, right? But we know that happens. We know that happens. However, there's Article 51 of the UN Charter that would allow for self-defense. And states are allowed self-defense until the Security Council can take whatever necessary measures it can to maintain international peace. That's even possible. So that is one way. We'll talk about that later, how that would work. We'll try to answer these legal questions. So who could provide the future U.S. military security in space? Obviously, I think a good possible would be the Space Force. We have the Space Force. Of course, NASA trains the astronauts, so NASA would probably have to train them. And there's some pros and cons. I'm just going to go briefly over the main ones. And obviously, if we had that, if we needed that, which we don't really need right now because everything's fine, it would protect, our military and non-military actors performing space operations, and it would protect our U.S.-based national interests. That's a big one. Now, the most major con, obviously, it would be expensive and very time-consuming to train these astronauts. And the big problem is creating an arms race in outer space. We don't want them to start doing the same thing that we're doing. So something they brought up back in 2011 was these United Nations Transparency and Confidence Building Measures, the TCBMs. Not so much heard of today, but they're actually a really good idea to prevent some miscommunication, mistrust in space activities. Like I mentioned before, China's already been sending, I think they sent 3 reconnaissance satellites up this last week. So a lot of people got reconnaissance satellites up there. We got a lot of them. We got satellites up there that are tracking other reconnaissance satellites. But, the United States doesn't want to cause other parties to the Outer Space Treaty to develop and do the same thing we're doing. Because that would just be kind of detrimental to what we're trying to do and keep with the Outer Space Treaty, peaceful, use for all. So, if I remember, back in 1979, James Bond movie Moonraker came out. This is a part of the scene. If you remember, they had the space shuttle come out and actually, well, we'll say military people in spacesuits came out of the cargo bay and were firing lasers. What's interesting, that came out in 1979. The actual Columbia first space shuttle didn't actually lift off until 1981. So let's say we do have military personnel during space. What other kind of laws or rules would they follow? Well, anybody that's in the military knows about the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So they have to fall within that. So it's, and then obviously in any kind of conflict, there's always a rules, or non-conflict, there's always a rules of engagement that they'd have to actually follow. On the United Nations side, you have the laws of armed conflict, which would actually apply to military operations in outer space, and also the law of international armed conflict, which basically is military necessity and humanitarian considerations. So for the first legal question, can we use this? Can we use military personnel? And if you look for any other peaceful purpose that should not be permitted, I say we probably could. They don't really tell you what that is. I mean, the main distinct elements of what you can't do is nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. So I do think that there'd be a good argument that we actually could do that. And lastly, could they be allowed to use force in outer space? And interpreting the Outer Space Treaty, it would not be keeping in intent with Article 4. I don't believe that any kind of armed conflict would be considered as other peaceful use, peaceful purpose. However, we do have Article 51 of the UN Charter, so they could actually do some self-defense in the event of an armed attack. So just kind of something to think about, something that's out there. It could happen. It would be years from now, but just something to think about. And I thank you for attending the presentation. I guess we'll take questions at the end. And thank you, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Mark. Okay, next up, we have Dr. Larissa Beavers. She is a senior space developer and instructor. She has served in the U.S. Air Force as an intelligence analyst, a first sergeant, and an instructor at the Space Operator School at Vandenberg Space Force Base. Dr. Beavers is a recent graduate of the Doctorate in Strategic Intelligence from American Public University, so we are very proud and excited to have her here today. And she's going to talk to us about the connection between space exploration and international relations, exploring economic and diplomatic solutions based on historical achievements. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Beavers.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can everyone see? All righty. Okay, so yes, today I'm going to be talking about the connection between space exploration and international relations. So what we're going to go over is just why is this important to study, the connection that space has to international relations, and why this is important when we're talking about even military aspects. I think this is a great follow-up to what Mark was saying, because I'm going to kind of tie a little bit of some of these potential legal considerations into this part. And then we're going to look at some history of like, where have we collaborated internationally in the past, and why is that super important for that economic and diplomatic connection? So just to kind of start out, this idea formulated out of, actually, I'm a professor too at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, and I help a lot with international relations, and I have a deep interest in space. And so I kind of had this like, well, what's the connection between these two? And so since the beginning, we've kind of seen space playing a huge role in benefiting not just one particular nation, but several different nations. So these accomplishments, they run into each other in the international community, and countries start to create partnerships. And so How we need to create those partnerships, though, sometimes is dependent upon the way a nation thinks. And that's how we're going to get that connection. What is it that's they're interested in? And especially if our views don't match up. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about, how as space continues to progress, there's a lot of talk about the dangers of space. But to a certain extent, I'm here to kind of argue that there's two sides in terms of like international relation theories, that there are two kinds of space people, so to speak. And we'll kind of get into what those two people are. So we want to look at this because we want to understand why and how international relations can improve some relationships and even increase economic growth, which we see happening with just the interest in commercial and private sectors in the space domain. Okay, so the connection to international relations, you have what I would argue would be your space realists and your space liberals. And so when I talk about this is kind of drawing off of a paper by Rotter. And there are those in terms of realists who believe that space should be organized by national interests, and they convey skepticism about operating in the international community, or that we can even actually collaborate together and work together, because there has to be a sole power or a superpower. But then you kind of have your space liberals who are more optimistic about space, and they say, okay, there doesn't have to be one sole superpower, but in fact, non-nation states can up and grow in the space community and achieve greatness. And so this kind of all perpetuates back to like Locke and Hobbes, where Locke ends up countering a response to Hobbes' argument that the community is going to be a war of all against all. And that's kind of almost how space started, is, the US and Soviets, and they're going after this great achievement, and it kind of sparked this, what we call the space race. But now we kind of have where Locke argument is coming into play, where it's saying it could become a war. It doesn't have to, but it could. And so I feel like we're there because we have seen other nations enter the space environment and grow and learn from space. And we have Europe and the United States, India, China, Russia, and we're all trying to come together and collaborate. Now, when we talk about the weaponization of space, that has become problematic, especially with a lot of the dual use capabilities that are out there. So we have these satellites that, yes, may be tested for purposes of clearing space debris, but they also have a potential capability to damage another satellite. So how can we approach countries that are developing those capabilities? And this is kind of where that connection to international relations come in. What is that country focused on? Are they focused on their national security? What are their national interests? And how can we connect in order to create diplomatic solutions or even economic growth by coming together? So we have this history of collaborating. It's not like we haven't done it before. We have the Outer Space Treaty that we came together on and decided what was acceptable and what was not. And as Mark outlined, it's not very descriptive in all of the things, but it provides that baseline. And the military, all nations are very smart by not agreeing to certain things, because if one country does it, then they might have limited their ability to be able to respond. So again, with international relations, this is where those theories are going to come into play, and you have to think about what is that country's ideology and how are they focused on those things. And then we have the International Space Station, which the last couple of years has Russia has come out and said several different statements of whether they're going to continue or not continue, but we have collaborated with Russia, Canada, Japan when it comes to the International Space Station, the Hubble telescope. One of the big important one, I think, is the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. And this is really important because this is kind of a pinnacle point during the Cold War. Tensions were high, yet the United States and the Soviet Union were able to come together and work on this project and even exchanged gifts when they started doing these RPO, these rendivorous operations. So now what we have in the future coming up is everyone wants to go to Mars. And so I think this is very important because we see China, India, United States, Europe, all conducting these Mars exploration opportunities. And these are doorways for the international community to come together and be able to create relationships that are not grounded on a contentious subject. Because when you talk about satellites, especially when you're talking about military satellites or spy satellites, and you try to get countries to come together, it's a contentious subject. Don't tell me what to do with my satellite or where it can operate or how I can maneuver it. Whereas Mars exploration creates talks that, they have somewhat of a common ground to be able to come together and say, this is what we want to pursue and explore. And so we need to be able to learn from these situations where we have these non-contentious situations that have opened up talks, not just amongst the national leaders, but also among the people. Because sometimes that is where another issue may arise is the leaders may understand what's going on, but sometimes the people don't understand. And that, I think, would open up more doorways for companies to talk to each other, for people to see some positive things in the media, which is very important. And I do very much understand as an intelligence analyst, the threats that are out there and that are posed by these countries, the different countries. But it's also important to understand that there could be some positives and we need to start shedding light on that also. So what's the connection that this all has, that space all has to economic and diplomatic relations? There is a resource scarcity. And so space exploration is driven by the search for valuable resources and information. So countries can begin to cooperate and gain access and control to these things if they begin having these different talks. But it's all become a competition, which healthy competition is good. But sometimes that competition from one environment, such as the military satellite environment, carries over into these other sectors of space exploration, sometimes creating contentious relationships where maybe there doesn't necessarily have to be one. And then space is a driver of economic growth. We have seen that with companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX and coming into the industry and creating new and innovative ideas. And I think that was a big win for the United States. And we need to continue to have a strong space sector to include satellite manufacturing and where parts and components are coming from. Space tourism is one of those things that opens up an international cooperation, because it is not just going to be a door that it should be opened only to the United States. If a company is going to offer space tourism, they're not going to limit it to just the United States. So looking at those relationships and how we can expand those on an international scale. And then finally, space it's a strategic domain. And so it has been viewed that way because of its military and national security purposes. And we need to continue, as Mark stated, to engage in conversation about the weaponization of space, establishing norms is going to be extremely difficult, because everyone's norm is not going to be the same. And maybe they're okay with, approaching a certain satellite within a certain distance, but they're not okay with that being done to them. So everyone has their own idea of what's acceptable and what isn't. And so this research has kind of showed, when we talk about norms of behavior, whether it's space or cyberspace, that has yet to be determined. Maybe it's getting there to a certain degree, but in order to prevent conflicts, right? That's why it's getting there. And the safety of space and the things that are located in space, to include the International Space Station, because at the end of the day, nations like Russia, China, the United States, Europe, they all want to thrive. No country wants to see all of their satellites go up in flames. That would ruin hundreds of, decades of research and money and evolution for these countries. So no one country wants to see that actually happen. So I think that's an important thing to consider too. At the end of the day, most countries want the same thing. They want to evolve, but sometimes power and the idea of power, and this is where some thinking maybe needs to change on a diplomatic scale. Maybe we're no longer in the time period where there is one superpower. Maybe there should be multiple, where they come together and work together. And that puts, a geostrategic position where you don't have one country ruling, having the final say. Maybe you have a community coming together. So with that, it's important to view those connections between international relations and space, and how we could use the theories that are associated with international relation and apply them in a real world environment, and even in an international environment, so that we can understand who we are trying to create relationships with and how we are going to progress that in the future. Start off with areas where there's not a lot of tension, and then maybe eventually have a talk down at a table and talks about some norms in terms of certain weapons testing, when it comes to anti-satellites technologies, co-orbital assets in space, and how to be able to protect not just one nation's satellites, but all of the technology that's up there. But that is all I have. So thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much, Larissa. Okay, so last but not least, we have Dr. James Barney, who's going to bring us down back to earth with a talk about the connection to education. And Dr. Barney is an instructor in the Legal Studies Department. And like other members of this panel, he's a lifelong student. He most recently completed his PhD in history. So we're very happy to have Dr. James Barney talking about the fragility of space studies and forging a vibrant academic field. Okay, James, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction. And before I get started, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference, and Mark and Gary and Larissa for their presentations. Next, I want to note that the ideas in this presentation are my own, and this is an abbreviated examination of a few issues facing space studies professionals. So in the future, I hope to put together a more extended discussion of these issues, but that's the nature of presentations. But with that said, let's get started into the presentation. And in order to understand this presentation, let me try to contextualize it. Over the last 2 years at this conference, I've discussed how the study of space is an interdisciplinary field that must not only embrace the STEM fields, but also explore a collection of other issues related to space exploration and the future exploitation of space resources, including the ethical considerations of such activities. As discussed at the prior conferences, the study of space involves not only the technical knowledge that Gary alluded to to how to explore space, but how to do so in an ethical manner. My co-panelists today have vividly demonstrated the interdisciplinary nature of the field, which embraces topics as diverse as how to travel to space, and also as law and policy issues raised in the prior panelists. Today, I'm going to discuss three major challenges that I believe that space studies professionals are facing. Goes without saying that we're living in exciting but also challenging times, because we're at a crossroads. Every day there's a news story about the exciting potential space exploration, including recent missions to the moon's south pole. At the same time, geopolitical tensions between the major spacefaring nations, the general public's seeming apathy towards space, and the rapid commercialization of space should raise alarms for any serious academics. These three trends, which have emerged, threaten to undermine the long-term viability of space studies as an independent academic field. And I just want to offer some potential solutions. First, the breakdown of cooperation between spacefaring nations and the emergence of potential rival blocs alluded to in the prior presentation can threaten to transform the space studies field into an academic field that will merely serve the interests of particularized countries. At the same time, the emergence of a collection of non-space actors that seek to commercialize space may influence the field and undermine the space law regime embodied by the Outer Space Treaty, which emphasized the cooperation and non-appropriation of space. And also, despite the great benefits that space exploration and the rapidly growing space industry can provide to the world, the field has to do more to spark the general public's imagination into the field's utility. While these are alarming threads are emerging, this speech is not meant to discourage space studies professionals or be interpreted as a criticism of anybody. To the contrary, the speech hopes to inspire space studies academics to play a key role in the development of an independent field of inquiry about space and its complexities that could withstand the test of time. International cooperation, public funding, and a broad and worldwide base of popular support and diverse and welcoming field that taps into the talents and perspectives of a wide range of people from across the world are the elements of any academic pursuit, including space studies. To preserve the field's viability and longstanding relevance, the field of space studies must serve as a model of cross-national cooperation. Universities in Europe and the United States are currently cooperating on various projects that are influenced by technology that's developed from the space industries. These cross-border cooperations serve as a model for future research between people worldwide. Admittedly, there are geopolitical and legal realities that serve as barriers to cooperation between the major spacefaring countries, as there are tensions between the United States and Russia and China, alluded to in the prior presentations. The lack of cooperation between these countries and the emerging trends that point to the division of the world into rival space-faring blocs point to a future where space studies academics will merely serve the narrow nationalistic interests of their countries. Space studies academics must advocate for international cooperation between academic institutions and academics from across the world to counteract this trend. In the existing reality, doing so will take more than courage or speeches, but will require changes to laws and changes in the geopolitical landscape. The field of space studies also has the potential to serve as a model for the power and potential of international cooperation in academics that can inspire similar cooperative efforts in other fields. For example, the brief history of space exploration reveals that cooperation between spacefaring nations, even geopolitical rivals like the United States and the Soviet Union, has led to great innovations. And there's no reason for the successes of the past, which include the International Space Station should become footnotes in history. Next, let me turn to the second point. Is that the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which serves as the space law's foundational document, states that the space exploration should benefit all mankind and prohibits the appropriation of space resources. However, the emergence of the commercialization of space and the proliferation of non-state actors in the past decades have the potential to transform the nature of space exploration and studies. Commercial actors have transformed space exploration as reusable rockets have made the cost of going to space much, much lower. Then there are also studies that the space industry has the potential to be $1 trillion industry. Then there's been cooperations between universities and commercial interests. The influx of commercial money into the field of space and the forging alliances between universities and private interests has the potential to influence the scholarship in space studies and undermine the ethos of the space law framework that emphasizes how individual states or actors should not appropriate space. The commercialization of space also has embraced an ethos that could potentially influence the research, as private interests may try to move the scholarship in a certain direction. For example, there's been a great deal of discussion about companies trying to exploit space resources on the moon, Mars, the asteroids. These type of discussions have normalized the appropriation of space resources and raised various legal and ethical questions that should concern space studies academics. In the face of this commercialization of space academics must advocate for detachment as well as for increased public funding of space exploration, as public funding, while it's imperfect, is the product of a legislative process, at least in the democratic countries, that represent the interests of a larger population beyond the interests of a private company or individual. The exploration of space and the future exploitation of space resources has the potential to transform technology, and benefits from those activities could result in trillions of dollars of wealth creation. Despite the potential total transformational effect of the space industry, there seems to be apathy within the general public. Thus, while there are moments when the general public, are interested, like in the last couple of weeks when there's attempts to go to the moon's southern pole, the general public doesn't seem to have a connection between space exploration and the technology embedded into their ordinary lives, like GPS, internet access, rapid advances in technology. The disconnect between the general public's interest in space derives from a host of factors, including that billions of people are struggling to survive, and space is not an immediate concern for them. Simply put, space academics have to do a better job of trying to convince the public that the space is relevant to their ordinary lives, and they have to do so to try to counteract the notion that space is merely for private interests or playground for the rich or battleground for nation states. So space academics have to prove that the budding space industries offer opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives, and that the resources from space will eventually benefit the greatest amount of people here on Earth. Space study academics must also engage in a long-term project that will expand space studies reach beyond the academy and try to reach people wherever they are. And that includes having a concerted effort to broaden the reach outside the developed world into the developing world, and also move it from the university to all levels of education. So in conclusion, we're at a turning point, and it deserves our collective action. By advocating for more public awareness, securing diverse funding streams, fostering international cooperation, and embracing diverse perspectives, space studies can lay the groundwork for an academic field with a solid foundation. Let me end this up but this, it says at the space conferences that I've attended, there's always an ongoing debate about whether space future will look more like Star Wars or Star Trek, reflecting two possible alternatives. While these debates are really amusing, the reality will probably look nothing like these depictions. Instead, we as academics in 2020, it's today, we have the agency to create a field of study that will support, challenge, nurture future space professionals. And we have to do so when our goals are wedded not only in today's realities, but in a future that benefits the greatest number of people here on Earth. And to do so, we have to do it in an ethical manner. And this, in my view, should be the goal of any space academic. So I hope we move beyond science fiction and create a robust academic field to deal with Earth's realities and not escape them. And that's how we would create a study of space studies that would meet the needs of the most amount of people. And I hope that I've raised some thoughts, and I really appreciate the opportunity to give my presentation today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Allison Becker, who is our discussant.
Hello, everyone. I do want to thank all of our speakers for today. They bridged between Earth, Moon, and Mars, and they presented a variety of thoughts about several interconnected aspects of space exploration and education. And there are some questions for them. Given the linkages between their subjects, I invite each of them to answer the questions as they see relevant to their respective topics. And I would like to begin actually with Dr. Watts's question. She was curious about everyone's thoughts on what goals the U.S. and international community should prioritize in space. Are there certain goals that might be achievable in our lifetime? Are there any goals that you would like to see that are not currently on the U.S. or international agendas?
Mine's pretty simple. I always like to see cooperation between the states and to go with the foundation of the Outer Space Treaty. So peaceful use and benefit to all countries. And we have that now. We may be going the wrong way with it, but right now, I mean, space, like Dr. Deal said, it will kill you. It can kill you. So cooperation is paramount.
Yeah,
You know, and kind of, oh yeah, go right
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Michelle.
Well, just one thing I was curious about, you know, for all of you also, when we talk about cooperation, what do you think is the best forum for, you know, is there a certain forum, you know, like the United Nations, you know, or meetings through the Artemis Accords that are kind of the best way to achieve that?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm necessarily the best person in the room to address that aspect of the question, but just going back to the original sort of prompt, I would say that, you know, whether in cooperation with many nations or done independently, I think the priority has to be to make mankind a multiplanetary species. I know this is something that Elon Musk has advocated for a long time, and one of the founding principles of the SpaceX company. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that to advocate for him or anything that he's done recently. I know he's a controversial figure, and I'm not stating an opinion on him one way or another. I'm just saying that on that particular subject, I happen to agree. You know, again, for all the reasons that I mentioned in my presentation, our continued existence is by no means guaranteed. We have to spread our eggs out, right, so to speak, and by not having them all in one basket, at least if something catastrophic were to happen to the Earth, there is a pathway for mankind to continue. But as it stands right now, if Earth were to suddenly be uninhabitable due to any kind of disaster, the human project would be over instantly. There's really no way, because we have no contingency plan that is off-world. So whether it's the moon or Mars or Venus, I've talked about, you know, the potential for flotillas to exist in the sort of atmospheric density of Venus, where actually temperature and pressure and certain characteristics that are vital for human life are actually better than they are on Mars. So there's a number of potential candidates. There's moons around Jupiter and Saturn that people think, might potentially contain subsurface oceans. So lots of options, and I'm not necessarily advocating for any one as a preference, but we have to establish permanent colonies off-world that allow for, again, some independent survival in the event that something happens to our planet.
Dr. Watts, do you hear me? This is my take is that the tremendous amount of wealth creation in the next probably decade or 2 decades is in satellite technology and in the internet field. So my priority would be that we need to extend the benefits of this technology, this umbrella of the satellites that we have, to the developing world, and put that technology of internet access, Wi-Fi access, into the hands of people in Africa and Asia and South America, because this shows the real impact of space and how it could benefit people's lives. So let me just give an anecdote that I was watching on TV. I won't mention the channel, but people in Africa have the ability to use a cell phone with GPS data that's provided through satellites, and to show where they should move to feed their livestock. And this kind of technology saves people's lives and shows the real utility of what the benefits of space in the here and now. Yeah, we have to think about the generational, but if we have the capabilities to do, we should do what we can to try to help people, and all people, or as many as we can. So that's my perspective.
I was just gonna add a little bit. If we do try to do this through, say, the UN, if this was a forum that I think that's really what it was created for, there has to be a significant reevaluation of how they conduct that particular, or how they conduct forums in general, because there is a lot of controversy with some of the actions of certain nations, to include the United States, China, Russia, North Korea, that bias starts to flow into the conversations, and not being able to separate some of those issues when it comes to evaluating new issues. And not saying that that's right or wrong, but that's just what tends to happen in human nature. And then for the second part of the question, one of the things that I would like to see a little bit more emphasis on is the United States has this approach to North Korea, Russia, China as independent. And we look at them independently in the national security strategy, in the space doctrine, and even in the DIA threat assessments that are out. But we now see a growing relationship between Russia and North Korea. And we know that there's a historical connection between China. So now you have, like, kind of talked about before, maybe there's not one superpower anymore, but now you have 3 powers that have 3 common interests. Each of them wants something. China wants Taiwan, North Korea wants South Korea, and Russia wants its old Soviet territories back, right? So they have come together, even though to agree to disagree. And now I think we need to do that too. So, but that's what I'd like to see. We focus on them independently. Now they're coming together. What if they all, hypothetical, not saying it's going to happen, what if they all decide to go after their territories at the same time? What are we going to do? It's going to be ugly. Okay, but that's something to think about.
Thank you all for that. And what the UN's role in all this is an interesting question, and it can go in multiple directions. One of which could be the creation of some kind of a space court. And what my thoughts are, or my question is on this is, if there are common rights that exist under the existing space treaties that are based on the principles of justice and equity, will those continue if, say, a space court is created for dealing with a variety of issues that might come up? And where do non-state actors fit into this? Does that make sense? Any takers?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the first half of that again?
Yeah, it was relevant to whether the UN might be an appropriate sponsor for some kind of a space court to help. It's something beyond just ordinary international relations kinds of things. Eventually, we're going to have issues that are going to arise directly from space, such as with Gateway. And one example that came up at an earlier segment was docking issues. So if a spaceship from some other country, India, whatever, comes onto the Gateway and causes damage, who has jurisdictional kinds of issues. That's beyond our topic here. But my question is do you think the UN might be a good foundation for a separate space court, or can we build off of what already exists with international law?
I think we could definitely do a space court, but from my understanding, International Court of Justice would take care of that, which is a United Nations function. And that's,
Allison.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily a space policy expert, but as an attorney, I can just speak to the fact that, international law becomes a nightmare, terrestrially speaking, because of the way that different countries handle their legal systems. Even the most ostensibly similar countries, if you were to take, for example, the US and the UK, we have a common foundation of laws, but we operate on very different systems. And so they're apples and oranges. And to say nothing of, if you were to pick another random country around the map, China, India, Australia, what have you. So yeah, on a shared sort of landscape of territory and resources like space, we have to have a common, sort of like the IJC, the International Justice Court, like we have to have some sort of common forum for that is in agreement. And it's easier said than done. Obviously, I realize that, but I don't see it working if there's, here in the US, obviously, for example, if you use an analogy, you have international waters, and that's handled by international law. But then you have U.S. waters, and obviously respective countries have their own sovereign territory within a certain coastal range outside of their actual coastlines. So there's sovereignty, but what happens in space? There's no real region of sovereignty for any one nation. So there has to be sort of a communal effort there.
Allison, this is my response. A student actually did a proposal similar to what you're discussing, and this is what I had said to the student: it's a very good idea, but in order to do anything, needs consensus among the major space-faring nations, which is Russia, United States, and China. And I don't believe there's a consensus. In fact, I believe there would be a breakdown of the existing outer space treaty and more conflict, and going back to a Wild West scenario more likely than a development of a space court. Or the space court might develop between the alliances of different spacefaring countries. So it's a great idea, and is in the future probably be happening, but I don't see it happening anytime soon in our current situation, because it took almost a generation for the current space law regime to develop in the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. But it's a good idea.
Thank you all. We have a question from Kristen Drexler. She wants to know your thoughts on a UN 2030 agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, including an 18th SDG to be added: space for all on Earth and beyond, a civilian-led space development with human communities living and working in outer space to expand and multiply benefits to all the peoples of Earth. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I actually attended the seminar last Friday. They were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think this is really good stuff. I mean, it was, I think it was the United Nations. It was 1 week long. I did attend last Friday's session. These are all things they were talking about, which was really good. I like to see it happen.
I agree. I actually did a case study on the UN in terms of their different goals that they had and what they were focusing on, and whether some of those goals were going to be attainable or not. And again, it kind of goes back to this collaboration and whether we can agree. Because I'd love to see a lot of this happen, but with all the different nations and views that are out there, some of these are not priorities. It'd be great if they were, but in some countries they're not. They might state that they're a priority, but actions prove otherwise. So hopefully that they can be obtained.
Thank you. And oh, I've just got a message that we need to wrap it up. I was going to ask one more question, but I think we're out of time now. Is that right?
It was a pleasure giving a presentation today. Thank you.
Ditto. Thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for the discussion.
For having us.
Bye now.
Bye.